All right. As I was saying, a warm welcome to each one of you. And this is it's a new RC, as you all know, the first session. And I'm happy that we have about 17, participants, including all of us who have joined in. And I'm Dr. Leena Pujari, convener of the ad hoc RC on pedagogy, teaching and learning. And I'm happy to see all of you. Just a little bit on why this RC and what do we propose? I think let me begin by saying that classroom teaching and learning and our pedagogical practices, I think that they're very important components of our craft and how we do our sociologies. While we do focus a lot on curriculum, research, and examinations, I don't think we have engaged enough with the idea of classroom as a site of immense possibilities. How we as pedagogues or research scholars and students really engage with our discipline. So I think this is a space where we not only interrogate, but it also offers the possibility of a reimagination. And this is going to be a space for all. In fact, I invite all young research scholars to join the RC deliberations, to participate enthusiastically, because if you do that, I think our RC is really going to expand and grow. And in fact, all along, we have felt the need for a RC on pedagogy, teaching and learning, and I'm happy that the MC finally passed this and they have supported it. So this lecture, as you know, as we've also written it, is the first in a series that we are planning. And so please do follow the social media handles of ISS to stay updated on the upcoming events of RC3. And yes, we are going to be very careful now. We are going to ask for registrations, and it's, in order to enable, because being part of a safe group is also extremely important. And even as in pedagogy, we discuss this in our classrooms, as is really, really unfortunate that it happened here. But anyway, we need to move forward. So we have a distinguished panel today, which is going to engage with different aspects of pedagogy. And let me very quickly introduce them. Our chairperson for the day is Dr. ANUREKHA CHARI, who is a professor at the Department of Sociology, University of Hyderabad. She specializes in gender and citizenship rights, agrarian issues development, teaching, learning, feminist pedagogy. She has been a recipient of C.V. Raman Fellowship to do her postdoctoral research, and she has published in national and international journals and has chapters in edited books. And a more recent publication is Towards Conceptualization of a Safe, Inclusive, and accessible classroom, and classroom as a site for feminist civic literacy. Our speaker for the day is the distinguished sociologist, Dr. Gita Chadha. Dr. Chadha is visiting professor at Azim Premji University, Bangalore, and also holds the Obaid Siddiqi Chair at the National Center for Biological Sciences, again in Bangalore. Her research interests include science studies, feminist theories, and post-colonial studies. She has taught sociology at University of Mumbai and the University of London's international program. She has designed a pioneering feminist science studies course at TISIS, and she has published extensively in journals and has co-edited 3 volumes on feminist and science, reimagining sociology, and on mapping scientific method, disciplinary narrations. So welcome both Gita and ANUREKHA. And then, of course, we have Dr. RITUPARNA. Anybody, she's a familiar face. All of those who have been doing sociology will know that she has been a wonderful anchor at the sessions in doing sociology. She's currently assistant professor of sociology at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. And RITUPARNA, she has been a recipient of the Krishna Raj Fellowship in 2013 and the Zuban Saskawa Peace Foundation grants for young scholars from the Northeast. And her research interests lie in exploring questions of culture, food, media, and pedagogy. And she is also published extensively, and she serves as the editor of the South Asian region of the journal South Asian Region in Society. So welcome all 3 of you, and I look forward to a very engaging and enriching session. And now may I invite ANUREKHA to proceed further.
Thank you, Leena. I won't thank you for introducing us, and thank you so much, Gita, for accepting our invitation. And I think you are one of the right person to start the whole discussion on pedagogy, teaching and learning, the whole RC. So looking forward to your talk. Yeah, I would reserve my comments to after Rituparna speaks. Yeah.
The host will have to allow me to share screen. Is this better?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So, good evening, everyone, and congratulations firstly to ANUREKHA and Leena for having successfully introduced this RC. And I personally think it's a very important RC. And I would like to thank the ISS for actually considering it and actually allowing it, or let's say, including it in the as an RC in the ISS. So thank you everyone, particularly for thinking of me, though I think there are many others who've thought about it much more deeply. I come from a position largely of my practice and the craft and some thinking along the way on why and we need to discuss pedagogy separately. Yeah. So I have a PowerPoint, and it's basically just to give a sort of a visual peg uh, to all of us. So I start with a couple of quotes from Nehru, which I think have sort of, you know, laid out what education per se was imagined as for the modern Indian nation state. And Nehru says that a university stands for humanism, for tolerance, for reason, for the adventure of ideas and the search for truth. Further, in another occasion, he says the object of education was to produce a desire to serve the community as a whole and to apply the knowledge gained not only for personal but for public welfare. In another context, he says, education is not just about acquiring knowledge, it's also about developing critical thinking skills and a sense of social responsibility. So, in a sense, we get an idea from these words of Nehru's about the kind of vision that came through modernity, through Enlightenment modernity, in the shaping and making of the Indian nation also. And to some extent, I think that vision continues to be. We also know that the policies, I'm not a policy person, but we also know that the policies, the CHARI Commission, then the NPE, and now the NEP, have all sort of moved along this vision in different ways. So, for example, in Nehruvian vision, in the CHARI Commission's ideas, there was a lot of emphasis on science, on technology, and the education around that. As we moved, there was a lot of emphasis that happened when liberalization happened on commerce and management. And now we see a lot of emphasis in the new NEP on, for example, indigenous systems of knowledge, bringing in, for example, Charvaka, Sushruta, all the possible potential ways of bringing in, for example, indigenous knowledge systems. I would say that in a strange sort of a way, the approach to education has sort of done that journey from a colonial nationalist vision to now a sort of what else, for the want of a better word, a post-colonial imagination of what education should be and what it should do for a country and a society and a culture like India. So in this context, I would like to look at our discipline. I think it was last year, that I had proposed a seminar and conducted one at the University of Mumbai, and I think Leena was a part of it, where I tried to sort of articulate the relationship between what I call a sociological ethic and the spirit of pedagogy. Now, I try, of course, is obviously taking off from a Weberian interpretivist perspective and taking off from his classical book on Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. I sort of play with that idea, basically to ask ourselves that where are we today as a discipline, and what are the kind of pedagogic principles, challenges that we face. So I'd say arguably the discipline of sociology works with two modernist principles, and those are both crucial to what we do. One is of critique and the other is of empathy. These are embedded in our theoretical, methodological, and pedagogical practices and would constitute what I refer to as the ethic of sociology. Yeah. Apart from sociology being a discipline which was deeply rooted in a positivist dream, it also found it, as we all know, its challenge in the interpretivist argument and went on further, mm, up to today, the entire postmodernist challenge, the entire stability, say, I'd say for some of us of standpoint epistemology. But critique and empathy remain to be two very, very crucial principles of our practice. Now, often these two principles, I'd say, come in conflict with each other, right? Presenting to us very unusual dilemmas as researchers, as theorists, as pedagogues, depending on who and what we are required to critique and or what are we expected to empathize with. This is always a very, very difficult question for us, right? And I submit, like many people do, that the conundrum is solved only if a moral argument is deployed. And what do I mean by that? A moral argument based on justice, freedom, and liberation. The fact that these ideas too are relative and subjective to the social context makes our terrain even more complex. Now, combining the principles of critique and empathy, I suggest that we produce an ethic that goes beyond the standard positive notion or positivist notions of research and pedagogy, but also more importantly of truth and knowledge. Yeah. So, what is is there a universal truth? Is there an absolute truth? Is a big question that we ask, and many of us who look at the two, the classic two sociologists of interpretivism and positivism, would argue that the interpretivist tradition, based on principles both of empathy and critique, actually are what make our discipline unique. Now, this whole idea and the spirit of pedagogy, in Weberian sense, I also would say and would submit that the spirit is spirit in, we might not, and we know that he was a person who used the idea of ideal types a lot. So whether he speaks about the ethic or speaks about the spirit, these are ideal types that he constructs. And and what do I mean by the spirit of pedagogy? First, I'd start by actually problematizing the term pedagogy. I don't know whether all of you here, whether ANUREKHA and Leena, who've thought of this RC, how would we look at the term pedagogy, which comes under a lot of criticism, because it does seem like, if you look at the etymological origins of the term, they do seem to think that the learner is in a way infantilized and thought of as a child and the teacher or system which is constructing the educational structures and the processes is probably talking down or probably thinking of the learner as a blank slate on which knowledge will get written. So, do we want to? I mean, of course, the debate is that should we then think of using terms like teaching, learning, philosophies, practices, and processes, rather than using the term pedagogy? Is it more democratic? Is it more in tune with the kind of spirit of pedagogy that we are talking about in this context? When I say we, I actually mean people who are thinking of our discipline in the critical fashion that I outlined earlier. In that same spirit, do we want to think about, for example, thinking of the term pedagogy and talking about teaching, learning, philosophies, practices, and processes, which is also, I notice, part of the title of the RC, right? So I think it's very important for us to sort of just lay down a very basic difference, for example, say between the project of education and how we are thinking of pedagogy. The project of education, as we notice, going back to the Kothari Commission and other policy documents that were trying to translate the vision of modern India, the modern nation state, were also talking about education for the national well-being, for the larger social well-being, also for the individual per se, for the individual growth and development. But I'm not quite sure whether the emphasis that we need to have, that we know as pedagogues and teachers, that we need to have on the process of actually teaching, learning, the process of making syllabi, the process of taking texts and going into the classroom, the process of examining the structure of the syllabus and the agency of the teacher, the structure of the interpretation of the teacher in interaction with the agency of the students. These processes, so to speak, perhaps have not got as much, shall I say, as much focus or as much attention as probably they should have. Yeah. So I'll say that while problematizing the term pedagogy, we definitely need to keep our focus, our intellectual focus, our research focus on questions of teaching, learning, philosophies, practices, and processes. Because the classroom is a disciplinary site, right? That's where our discipline actually comes alive and in some sense is reproduced, right? So I think the classroom, also in our pedagogic purpose of designing academic material like syllabi, reading lists, we constantly craft things on these two axes, I feel, in order to uphold the democratic, secular, and pluralistic spirit of modern pedagogy. And those two axes are again critique and empathy. And this becomes even more significant as we begin to navigate very complex questions of social locations, of caste, of class, of religion, of sexuality, of ability, ableness, and the entire list that makes us different from each other. Yeah. Navigating complex questions of social location, cultural identity, and epistemic relativism, which is to say that, standpoint epistemology would make us aware and conscious of the fact that when we teach, say, theories of family in class and coming from above, what do theories of family look from people on the margins? What do theories of caste look from people who've experienced and suffered the caste system in ways that the top approach did not take on board at all, or the abstract universal theory of caste that we worked with for so long. Yeah? Further, in the last decade, of course, we have seen the rise of cultural nationalism, which is threatening, almost as we all are experiencing, the basis of a dissenting civic society. And the discipline of sociology, as we all know, was born in the spirit of the Enlightenment, was born with the idea of as I've already said, critique and empathy, but born with the idea of questioning, challenging the idea that we move beyond the common sense notions that we receive as members of a society to actually reflect upon ourselves and our worlds. And things around us. So when that is the basic principle of your discipline, and when that comes under surveillance, under control, how do we practice the discipline of sociology? It puts us in a quandary, doesn't it? Because that is what was our purpose in a way. Further, with the deepening of global capitalism, and this is something that Maitreyi Chaudhary pointed out in the seminar that I just referred to at the beginning of this talk, she pointed out the growth, deepening of global capitalism, and she talks about it as, a smart society that we are getting into, but a strict society. So in response to the idea of growing of cultural nationalism and global capitalism along with digital technologies, what she says is that we are living in a smart and a strict society, and how do we then uphold or think of the spirit and the ethic of sociology? How do we think of the spirit and the ethic of pedagogy? There are no simple answers, and I don't think we intend to find any simple answers. The idea is to be able to collectively explore as teachers, as students, as researchers, as writers, as to where our discipline will go and how do we keep it alive. And historically, the site in which we practice the discipline has been the university, an important institution of modernity that contributes to civic society and the public sphere. And all of us know that with the privatization of education, now we don't have anything, I feel identifiable as a university that was imagined. We are in a terrain where we have, private universities, we have public universities, we have in public universities, state universities, central universities. It's an extremely complex landscape. So how do these different universities, what are the how and the social sciences within these universities, and particularly our discipline, how does it find some space for its own ethic and its own spirit, is something that we need to, I think we need to engage with continuously. Additionally, the challenges of employability, which have always been a challenge, right? Then where does a sociology student get employed? So I remember designing a course called Reading and Writing in Sociology, and it eventually became academically, what was it called? Reading and Writing in the Social Sciences. And finally, it became Writing Academically. And I'll share with you the process of that. So Reading and Writing in the Social Sciences, I'd constructed it as a very course aimed at, introducing the student to reading a complex text. Yeah, a social. I mean, I remember my experience of insisting to the university student to read the originals, of Marx, Weber, Durkheim. And I persisted in my 10 years at the university that every first year student should be reading. And they were amazing. Students came along. Some of them, of course, ripped off things from the internet, and the others actually genuinely engaged with it. But the question is, there's a serious problem with how to get students to enter a text. Firstly, there's a serious problem about how do you get them to engage with theory itself. And to be able to engage them with theory, you have to sort of put this idea that worked for me was to demystify theory and make theory, make the student own theory as them being theoreticians themselves, right? So there are many things that one has to do in the pedagogy of theory. But in how to introduce a text, how to read a text, how to understand the referentialities, how to understand the time in which it was produced, it's extremely complex. So in this course that I tried to do, which was writing academically, rather, which started off as reading and writing in social sciences, I realized that eventually it became a course called writing academically, which became a course aimed at how do you tell students who will get out of your master's program that what you've learned here for 2 years is not just going to make you, academic sociologist, because there are many who don't want to do that, or push you towards the NGOs, because again, there are not many who want that, or try to set you up in an HR or wing of any corporate organization. There are many who want to do that. My point was that how do we make sociology relevant to anything that they do? As the student gets out, to anything that the student does, how do you make that relevant? How do you take the spirit of sociology? If you become a filmmaker, if you become a blog writer, if you become youth influencer, whatever. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say, therefore, is that the idea of employability has been an old one, and it still is a huge concern for us, that where will our student get employed? Yeah. So we are trying to make the critical spirited citizen of civic society, but we also have to deeply concern ourselves with questions of employability, which is again something that Sharmila Rege dealt with quite wonderfully, actually. Now, interdisciplinarity that the NEP is throwing at us will also require us to engage and reimagine the ethic of discipline and the spirit of its pedagogy. That how do we, for example, bring in other disciplines, other social sciences, natural sciences, the humanities, how do we bring them? And the NEP is sort of committed to that idea. I'm just not sure how this will look like when it is operational. I don't want to just critique. I do want to sort of say that maybe there are potentials there which we need to, as sociologists and pedagogues, not give up on. Am I there, ANUREKHA?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes,
But-
yes.
Okay, but I don't know why. Okay, so I'm going to sorry. So I'm going to just talk to you about. I was wondering what to pick up on in terms of pedagogy, and I thought that I'll pick up on two challenges that we are all facing now, and share with you the kind of experiences and concerns that, for example, we are all encountering, and how do we collectively think about that. So, of course, as I just spoke about, one challenge is interdisciplinarity, right? So, somebody like me who's been working on sociology of science or on a feminist science studies subfield, interdisciplinarity has been a concern for a long time, right? We didn't actually need the NEP to bring it out. NEP has learned probably a lot from, say, disciplines like women's studies, disciplines like development studies on the one hand, disciplines like management studies or media studies on the other hand. And the NEP document, I remember asking Gaishna once to do this exercise for me, and I think the term multidisciplinarity comes several times. The term interdisciplinarity comes not so often. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that the kind of interdisciplinarity that we in the kind of vision that I spoke about for sociology, people who share that vision, in that kind of a vision, interdisciplinarity has always been critical interdisciplinarity. It is not just interdisciplinarity. It's not just how do we look at a phenomenon, an event, or an object from, say, philosophy, literature, science, social science, etc., etc. How do we look at it from different perspectives? That's one level of it. But our interdisciplinarity has been probably deeper. It's a critical interdisciplinarity where we also question the disciplines. We question the canons of the discipline and then move out of those canons as outliers, probably on the margins, and bring in criticality from all disciplines to probably challenge this idea of a universal, general truth of something. Our critical interdisciplinarities have taught us that these truths are produced from a social location, from a social context, in extremely situated ways, right? So my worry is that in the bandwagon of interdisciplinarity, which is not new to the NEP, which has anyway been happening, say, in other fields where, sociology is taught. For example, I taught sociology in an institution where management is far more important, and sociology gets taught there. But organizational behavior, HR management, all that. Yeah. Now, in a feminist classroom, in a sociology department, my challenges, and which we've spoken, all our challenges, which we've spoken about probably together also, is being how, so when I was designing the syllabus for contemporary feminist theory, I, of course, we started with the idea of Black feminist thinkers. They came from sociology, they came from law, they came from literature. We also have, we bring in Dalit feminist readings coming from people's lived experiences, because that's what feminist epistemology and pedagogy is all about. And how do you bring those into the feminist classrooms? How do you teach a philosopher like Judith Butler? How do you teach a philosopher like Martha Nussbaum? How do you teach a psychologist like Carol Gilligan? When you yourself are not really familiar with the disciplinary rigor and canon of these thinkers, right? Because they are speaking to their own discipline and canon and critiquing it, right? So the challenge has always been that, and often one brackets it up. Yeah, my approach was always that, no, let's engage with the text. Let's make the effort to understand that discipline from the critique that we are reading. Yeah. So this is a very big challenge of interdisciplinarity. What do we do with the disciplines, right? We can't give up. We shouldn't be giving up in disciplines. We bend them, we break them. But when we teach something like feminism, or when we teach something like caste, yeah, how do we bring these critical interdisciplinary domains into the classroom without losing the criticality, without losing the disciplinary conversation? Yeah, and of course, the feminist classroom. I won't get into that at the moment. I'll stop with the interdisciplinarity problem. In the science studies classroom is also a very, very interesting domain, because the science students are used to doing their science as if it is not from any context. At least in the social sciences and a sociology classroom, you tell the students that sociology originated in the Enlightenment period, it was contextualized within modernity, this was its dream, etc., etc., right? In the science student, or when I teach science studies to science students, it becomes extremely difficult because they don't have that historical context. They don't have that political context. They don't have a sociological context to what they do. And that is not their fault. It is exactly the way our education systems has been structured into the silos, right? And that's why it's important to go outside of the silos. But in the science studies classroom, it again becomes a very difficult thing. What text do you use? Do you use Thomas Kuhn? Do you use David Bloor? Whom do you use? I mean, I'm going to use text, social science text, philosophical text, Karl Popper. Am I going to use that? So the choice of what text to use, the choice of what uh, how you design the syllabi is absolutely um, uh, challenging is the only word I have. And how then do you make it? For example, in some of the context in which I taught these courses, I had to throw away all the texts and say these will not work. We have to work in the ideas. Yeah. And ideas worked in the science classroom. So the science students are extremely open to the idea of, is this how philosophy looks at it? Is this how history of science is? The interesting thing is that while that might happen, for somebody like me as a feminist looking at science, it becomes even more important to insert, or it's naturally, organically comes, which is the critical reading. So the critical reading of a history of science, the critical reading of philosophy of science, the critical reading of the sociology of science, that critical needs to be kept going. So, for example, when you tell the science student that science was constructed along with gender in the European modernity model, and that's how it sort of spread, it's cognitively a little challenging for them to really grasp that. But I must say that it's not impossible. And that's exactly where internal critiques of science will come from. Yeah. So, in both these, in the feminist classroom and in the science study classroom, one of the important things that I've had to keep in mind, which is something that we learn with practice, is how do you keep the structure of your syllabus, your course, however radically you might have designed it, with the agency of the students, fully recognize that your own agency is also operating. How do you put it on the table and then make learning conversation? Anurekha, you have to tell me when I'm going to run out of time. Yeah.
Okay.
How much time do I have, Anurekha?
I think another 5 to 7 minutes.
5 to 7 minutes. All right. Then maybe I'll rush through it. The other challenge is the challenge of intersectionality. Yeah. And I think it's the classroom actually which teaches you this. This is what I feel. And that's why pedagogy is crucial. And I'm sure all of us here will agree that intersectionality or lessons in intersectionality are best learned in the classroom. In a classroom, particularly in my kind of university where I was in a state university, the amount of diversity that you have, is immediately the amount that I transformed in the 10 years that I taught in the university, that has been remarkable. The kind of challenge that we are going through just now also in terms of, what does sociology do to individuals, who are thinking radically, who come from very marginal backgrounds, who have immense rage and anger in their minds and selves. How do we understand it in a classroom? How do we become attentive? And there are times that because it makes you extremely, and I take you to the second point of question of privilege. I mean, it initially makes you recognize the kind of privilege that you come with as a teacher. It made me recognize that. It made other students who came from places of privilege to recognize what it means to be privileged and what it means to be reflexive and give up on that privilege. Yeah. And that requires immense moral strength and requires, I think, sometimes a lot of churning to be able to understand the standpoint of a Dalit woman who will challenge everything that the women's movement of feminism has spoken about. Or, for example, the standpoint of, and you know, I often say this, that when we talk about standpoint, often very old-fashioned interpretivism, what it does is, oh, standpoint means you take the literal meaning of the language, means your standpoint, your standpoint, your standpoint, my standpoint, all standpoints are equal, listen to everyone. Listen to everyone. But standpoint, again, is an epistemology for marginal locations. Okay, and to bring standpoint in to your classroom, bring standpoint into your research is to be able to hear pain, to be able to hear suffering, structurally induced suffering, pain, and to be able to recognize privilege. And here, one of the best works that is coming out, at least from feminism, that in our context, is the work that both Anaga and Swati are doing at the Pune University, and which Anaga also spoke about at the seminar that I was referring to beginning of the talk, which is how those students learn to question privilege. And here I want to just say one thing, that, you know, when we start looking at privilege carefully, for those who are privileged, there is a lot of guilt. And the question has been, accusation has been, all your action comes out of guilt. And that's not really very positive way of reimagining power. But I think from their work, what I sensed is that how guilt can probably become a beginning point, and how guilt can perhaps become productive in building of dialogue, solidarities. And I've seen this happen in class. Therefore, I think that it's an extremely important possibility that we should be developing on the idea of how to develop solidarity across the axes of power, because guilt can often lead to silence, but guilt can often lead to productivity also. And the productivity where you begin to pay attention and hand over the voice from a position of privilege to a position of marginality. Yeah, not easy at all. And sometimes people also wonder whether it's the right direction to go in. I'm just submitting some of my experiential thoughts. Now, I'll just end with a little bit on dwelling a bit again on our disciplinary strength. And I think that the canon itself, while as feminist, critical challenges from critical race studies, challenges from critical sexuality studies, caste studies, have questioned the discipline itself, there are some things in the grammar which I think can still continue to help us. And I think methodological tools like building a sociological imagination to be able to see what happens to people in their personal lives, are connected with deeply structural and historical processes, allows us a deeper insight into things. In my science study classrooms, believe me, this helped. In the science studies classroom, every time I put on this question of difference, you know, why is it that somebody is different, doing something differently from another? Why is it there is discrimination with one group or another? Often the term that would come up, but these are personality differences. Men and women do things differently because they're personality differences. And I would laugh and say, I'm a sociologist, please don't talk to me about personality, because personality is also going to be sociologically constructed. Anyway, the idea, of course, was to be able to make them understand that connecting the individual with the structure is a methodological thing, which doesn't happen to us when we live in the world. The other methodological tools, and so this, of course, we know as C. Wright Mills, sociological imagination. The other is Peter Berger's idea of sociological consciousness, where you learn the art of skill, craft of debunking. Yeah, to debunking things around, questioning them, challenging them. So I find that also an extremely useful methodological tool which can take us, or at least keep us afloat in the task that I spoke about in the beginning. Theoretical perspectives, we always have a range and a choice. Yeah, we have the more, continue to have the more structure functionalists, to the more radical Marxists, to the post-colonial, to the subaltern. We continue to have a lot of theoretical perspectives. We are spoiled for choice. Critical pedagogies, as I just said, I've explained what I mean by that, to be able to challenge. And again, Berger's ideas of the methodology of sociology come handy. But eventually, I genuinely believe that the task is not an epistemic one. Methodological tools can help you understand, theoretical perspectives can help you explain, critical pedagogies can help you teach radically, to transgress. Ultimately, the thing that we rarely talk about our discipline is the moral imperative. The moral imperative of standing by what society, culture, social structures have erased with very, very strong tools of power. And unless we sort of stand by those moral imperatives, I think the discipline's ethic and the spirit in which we should teach it would not be fulfilled. So my question, for example, to my science students when I teach science studies is, ultimately, what is the moral consequence of the kind of science that you do? Is that even a question? And often the students, or even not just the students, the practitioners of science, often would probably struggle, and most naturally struggle, to even ask that question. Forget answering. And I often use Giddens, Ulrich Beck, and the anti-risk theorists to talk about how the kind of science and the kind of institutions of modernity that we have produced have sort of like Frankenstein aided in producing dystopian worlds. And what is the moral? Yeah. So with that, I'll sort of end and say thank you and congratulations and all the best to the new RC that is formed. And I'm melting here because it's so hot. And I had to shift here into this room simply because the internet there was bad. So sorry. I don't know. I hope I've made some sense to all of you. Thank you very much, both Anu and Leena.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Gita. I think you have like thrown a large number of questions and thoughts for us to think through. So can I request Rituparna to present her discussant views around 10 minutes? Rituparna?
First of all, let me thank Dr. Leena Pujari for giving me this opportunity to engage with Professor Chadha's work. First of all, I have engaged with Professor Chadha's works at multiple levels on many occasions. And even today's talk was very riveting, although I have listened to it under a little bit of stress, considering what happened at the beginning and then my own travel schedule. However, I take away from her talk are some more points about interdisciplinarity, pedagogy and the spirit, and the curriculum that she raises about curriculum is struggling with this idea of reliable, and that question has always existed. but I also feel that it's important to think about it in terms of including more marginalities and marginal voices. So a lot of people feel that sociology in India particularly is very mainstream, although it is a critique of what we see as mainstream society. So I think inclusive or more diverse voices in terms of text, in terms of experiences of Dalits, tribals, indigenous peoples, marginalized sections, Muslims, Christians, that sort of makes it better. And this is where the point of departure could be from what Professor Chadha also talks about in terms of the spirit of pedagogy. Because the spirit of pedagogy itself is education, and she makes this distinction between education and teaching. So we are talking about critical humanism as well. So now, in this context, I would also like to think about how we deal with issues of, let's say, majoritarianism, because it is an issue that is plaguing us, and also the concern with digital technologies, because they have become an important part of pedagogy itself. And how do we sort of, look at it? One answer would be to keep thinking in terms of interdisciplinarity, but also problematize this idea of interdisciplinarity itself, primarily because I do not think that it is the only solution of to solve employability, because we have seen that in spite of having interdisciplinary degrees, it could still lead to unemployment at one level. The other point that I feel is, which is important, is how do we talk about decolonization in terms of the pedagogy? Because can really decolonization be the only solution when we are also dealing with how majoritarian forces use decolonial ideas to advance their interests? And as pedagogues who are also responsible for sort of giving the education of a country a direction, it's important that we think along those lines. That how can we talk about collaborative research? How can we talk about breaking binaries and boundaries when there are also forces larger than us in question? And the last thing about sociology being critical, being in recent times, I feel that we are moving more and more towards session and simply not caring about what is happening to others. And there's so much information that there is also a sense of numbness in which all of us try to not think and avoid as much thinking as possible. So the solution is that you let it be, don't get involved. But sociology teaches us to be involved, to care. So how do we then problematize this idea of self-care, where we are supposed to distance from things that bug us, but at the same time be critical? The classroom space is also, in that sense, reflective of these larger questions. We see that there are these new questions about students asking about ideology, about teachers' private lives, about what teachers represent. And it sort of also makes us think about what we are in the classroom at the current moment. Are we just teachers, or are we also representatives of larger socio-political ideas and questions? I think this is where I take a lot from both Professor Maitri Chaudhary and Professor Gita Chadha's works, where they have looked at the feminist vantage point and sort of seen how identities can shape classrooms, and the importance of the state universities, because you see how the diversity in the classroom plays out. Several others who have worked on classrooms, like ANUREKHA here, also have looked at the need for mentorship and guidance. So in this moment of crisis, where we have precarity, non-employability, a lot of attacks on sociology, I have been myself one of the victims and also spoken about it. How do we make it pedagogically relevant and at the same time continue to be, engaging with the criticality without giving up on the essence? So these are some of the thoughts that I had, and there are many more, but I think I have already spoken for 10 minutes. So I'll wind up, and thank you so much, Professor Chadha, for the Dr. Pujari and Dr. WAGH for giving me this opportunity. But at the same time, really apologies for the inconvenience that I couldn't, switch on my video and give maybe 100% and only 90%. But I didn't expect the bot attack and the delay. So the question.
Yeah, I think one thing that this seminar, this talk brought into light the kind of challenges even to organize a lecture on pedagogy. I mean, it kind of just refuses for us to be taken seriously. And I think we have just proved ourselves that whatever comes, we just have to, just work with it. So I think like both Professor Gita Chadha and Dr. Rituparna have kind of raised very interesting questions. So I won't get in between the question and answer, but I would just like to flag off two things. One, I think the important with regard to the whole idea of what exactly education stands for. Like at the end, Gita ended with the moral imperative of it. Like, of course, we engage with the methodology, the theory, the pedagogies of it. But what is the vision that is driving us? What is the core? So can pedagogy through our classrooms and beyond classrooms anchor it in terms of what the discipline stands for and what we are striving towards? And I think the other interesting point that emerged from Rituparna's work is also in terms of collaborations. I think somewhere there, I think there is a lot of potentialities that one has to explore. Of course, keeping in mind the kind of challenges that we all face in a different context. Like, of course, there's no models that we can offer, even as an RC, newly formed RC. So what we can do is learn from each other, collaborative, work with each other with regard to the challenges that each one of us face in our own classrooms, which in the next semester again changes so drastically. So, so therefore, rather than models, we are looking for engaging with the kind of idea of the discipline that we are part of, I think. Yeah, so I think this was very interesting in the way the first lecture of the RC kind of flagged off. Yeah. So, may I request like a set of question and answers? Leena, do you think we can have questions for another 2 or 3 maybe? Yeah?
Yes, certainly. We must allow some interaction.
So, yeah. So the floor is open for questions, please. Okay, maybe, for me, I've already shared what I thought were important. Leena,
Okay, thank you so much, Anurekha. And I think Gita and Ritupurna, there have been significant takeaways. I mean, Gita talks about how it's important to not just be interdisciplinary, but to have those critical insights. I think that's a very important thing. She brings in the challenges of intersectionality, and all of that comes from her own classroom experiences. And so it's what's wonderful. And Geeta, I can't tell you how I love the lecture, such profound insights. And this between critique and empathy, and the moral imperatives, and how they can come in to address the conundrum and the dilemma that we often have. Ritupurna brought in very well the idea of social location of the pedagogue and how that might impinge the classroom interaction and discussions. So I think they have been, notwithstanding what we faced in the beginning, I think it was a wonderful session, so that you feel good at the end of it, that yes, it kind of ended well. And the only thing I feel bad about, my apologies to all those who I could not admit, who I could not allow. And probably there were at least 4 or 5 people who were trying to join, but I was not too sure about whether I should let them in. So I felt a little bad about that, because then it became in some ways an exclusionary space, I think. But of course, there'll be this YouTube video, and people can watch it and anyway learn a lot from it. So thank you so much to the 3 of you, and thank you so much to all the participants who joined, who remembered to join. Thank you so much. And we will have many more interesting things coming up in this session. And yes, Geeta, totally agree with you in terms of pedagogy and teaching and learning, the kind of differentiation that you brought in, which is why we thought we need to have this so that we can interrogate those practices of infantilizing and, classroom as a site of the disciplinary site, and how does one look at all those questions? Certainly. So thank you so much, and looking forward to the next session and having all of you. So please do join us for that. Yes, absolutely. Yes, Anurekha, you can talk to them. Yes.
Thank
So
you.
thank you. Yeah, it was wonderful, and I request to all of you, if you have some ideas for these lectures, both Leena and I have plans that it should go beyond, a general lecture series, right? So something more collaborative, something more where we can discuss. So any ideas, especially from the students, I think we would greatly appreciate it. Yeah. So we also need some input. So please feel free to connect to any one of us. Gita, me, Leena. Yeah, we can work together. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Even Gita and Rituparna can also give us ideas of, what all we can, because we really want this RC to be a very sort of a space where students can participate, research scholars can participate in a big way.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Have a good night. Bye.